You have 20 to 30 million Americans that suffer from addiction conditions, about the same number of Americans that suffer from anxiety and depression, a similar number of Americans that suffer from things like chronic insomnia, and pretty quickly you get to a majority of the United States that suffers from some form of a mental health condition. I am a believer that there is a future state where patients expect to receive a digital therapeutic first line, and where clinicians expect to prescribe a digital therapeutic first line, and where payers begrudgingly reimburse for a digital therapeutic first line.
That's Corey McCann, the managing partner at TRX Capital and the founder and former CEO of Pear Therapeutics. And I'm Josh Nelson, head of healthcare at THL Partners. And this is Healthcare in Action. It's a podcast that explores the latest developments and innovations transforming the U.S. healthcare sector, from cutting-edge technology to thoughtful approaches to patient care. I'm here with my colleague, Jon Lange, who's going to lead us in a conversation about digital therapeutics, including reflections from the early days of the market and the opportunities that lie ahead. Jon, take it away.
One of the really exciting things about the healthcare landscape today is the potential for technology to accelerate innovation and drive better care. And one area that's received a lot of attention in the past several years is digital therapeutics, which is software used to enhance medicine or used as a therapeutic on its own. While digital therapeutics have had a lot of ups and downs over the past decade, they offer the potential to transform treatment for a variety of conditions and dramatically expand access to care. From addressing addiction to insomnia to chronic diseases, FDA-approved digital therapeutics are pushing the boundaries of what technology can do in medicine. But there are a lot of medical, technological, and regulatory considerations that digital therapeutics companies will need to navigate to bring their products to market. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Corey McCann, managing partner of TRX Capital and the founder and former CEO of Pear Therapeutics. In addition to being a trailblazer in the digital therapeutics industry, Corey has been a CEO, entrepreneur, investor, and a researcher and physician. In this episode, we'll discuss his experience as a pioneer in the space, the challenges of navigating uncharted territory in healthcare, and a number of lessons Corey has learned through his experience running innovative companies and also investing in them. So let's get into it. Corey, thank you so much for joining me.
Jon, thank you for having me.
So maybe to start, for those who aren't familiar, would you tell us a bit about TRX Capital?
Of course. TRX is an early stage venture capital fund. We specialize in investing at the intersection of technology and biology. And what that means for us is on one end of the continuum, we'll look at things like tech-enabled services. Right down the middle of the fairway, we'll look at tech bio, so places where technology is a part of a medical device or a diagnostic. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we look at traditional biotech and specifically places where computation has the ability to inform biotech platforms. As I mentioned, we're early stage, so we tend to look at everything from starting companies in the office through to opportunistic Series Bs, and we tend to deploy $5 or so million initial checks with the opportunity to grow to $10 to $15 million positions for the winners in our portfolio.
Maybe taking a step back, for those people who aren't familiar with the Pear story and with digital therapeutics, would you just go back to the beginning and tell us, what are digital therapeutics? And take us back to the founding of Pear. What was the idea there? What was the mission? What's the story there?
There's been so much said on the topic that I'll try to be both comprehensive and brief at the same time. At times, it's been called software as a drug. At times, it's been called digital therapeutics. I think the title and the moniker is less important. I think the approach is a bit more what characterized the company. And so the way that we thought about these products is that fundamentally, these are medical products. Specifically, they're medical devices. They are software as medical devices. And what we did was we developed digital products to treat specific patient conditions. I'm sure later here we'll talk about our products in addiction and possibly insomnia. But there was a whole pipeline of products, much like you'd find in an early stage biotech company. We ran those products through clinical trials to understand what are the risks and what are the benefits associated with patient use of the products. We showed an efficacy benefit for the products, took that to the FDA, and ended up getting labels for these products. And I'm still very proud of the work that we did there. Pear had 3 of the first 3 ever FDA-approved pieces of patient-facing software. It's 2 of our addiction products, 1 of our chronic insomnia products. And that really formed the basis for the field that's now called digital therapeutics. From a commercial perspective, the model that we employed was very much like what a pharmaceutical company would employ. We had the products prescribed by clinicians, used by patients, and reimbursed by third-party payers, i.e. insurance companies. I think that's a model that still has a good deal of merit, and I'm sure in this conversation, we'll talk about what worked, what didn't work, and what we might do differently.
That's great. And maybe just to make it even more concrete, can you talk about maybe your first product and, maybe the path to FDA approval and also the patient experience, how a patient would interact with that product?
Absolutely. So our first product was and is called Reset. This product is an app which is prescribed to patients who are suffering from addiction to a number of substances, including alcohol, cannabis, cocaine, and stimulants like methamphetamine. So a patient is suffering from something like methamphetamine use disorder. They go to their clinician. The clinician diagnoses them and writes a prescription for the Reset product. The patient then uses their own smartphone. They, via the prescription, download the app, and they're then walked through a 12-week course of a very specific type of behavioral therapy, which traditionally would be delivered by humans with PhD level training in behavioral therapy. And in clinical studies and also in the real world, patients who utilized the Reset product had significantly lower rates of substance abuse. So they were able to use their substances of abuse less. They tended to show up to their in-person therapy appointments more frequently. And for this patient population, retention is something that's quite important. And then when we looked in the real world, those were patients who were costing several $1,000s less to the healthcare system overall.
Got it. And as I think about the differences or the benefits of digital therapeutics versus traditional therapeutics, one might be access, one might be standardization and best practices. But then there are also some things digital therapeutics can do that behavioral therapy in person can't. And so can you talk about those differentiators? How is a digital therapeutic different and what are the benefits versus traditional models?
I think about this as almost a 2x2 matrix. So, what are the benefits versus in-person therapy? What are the benefits versus pharmacotherapy? And I think you nailed the 2 versus in-person therapy. It's access and standardization. Most of the people that suffer from these conditions are not able to access any care, let alone the best of breed standard of care. And for things like opiate and methamphetamine use disorder, there's actually an anti-correlation between the severity of the problem and availability of face-to-face providers. Think about areas like rural Kentucky, where methamphetamine has ravaged the state. There are counties that don't have a single licensed mental and behavioral health provider there. So that's sort of the versus in-person care axis. Versus pharmacotherapy, I think of the benefits as being twofold there as well. So one, these are digital products, and while they're not side effect free, these are products that have far superior side effect profiles to drugs. So take, for example, SSRIs like Prozac for the treatment of depression. You have a whole number of different, very standard adverse events or side effects that patients just learn to live with. And in the case of a digital therapeutic, patients don't have to learn to live with those things. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning is that for many of these products, they are targeting conditions for which pharmacotherapy just doesn't work. So if you think specifically about what's called negative symptoms in schizophrenia, so this is things like a decrease in cognition for patients with schizophrenia. There are not medications that are approved to treat that constellation of symptoms. However, there are some promising digital therapeutics that are poised to address those symptoms for that patient population.
Tell me a bit about the journey at Pear. Of course, Pear went public in 2021 at a $1.6 billion valuation. Ultimately, a couple of years later, you wound it down. And so tell me a bit about the promise, but then also what didn't go as expected.
I think obviously a number of things didn't go as expected, or we might be having a very different conversation. I think the promise remains to create a company that generates first-line therapeutic products for most medical conditions via digital. I think there are still companies that are pursuing that promise. And I look forward to the day when this is mainstream medicine. I'm still very supportive of the vision and continue to be a believer. As we were building the company, we were a company of firsts. We were the first company to raise money for digital therapeutics broadly, before they were called digital therapeutics. We were the first company to go to the US FDA and engage the US FDA and to help them think about how to regulate digital therapeutics. We were the first company to have a digital therapeutic be cleared or approved, and we had the first 3 of those, and ultimately the first company to go public with the value proposition as well. So to this day, I'm very bullish on our ability to move the needle, and I'm proud of the work that we did. It's hard to be first, and I think you have to have a pretty thick skin to be a leader. I think the other piece that was very much a learning was just all things reimbursement. And, I think a lot of digital health companies, Pear included, have this belief that if you satisfy the triple aim, if you make clinicians' lives easier, if you improve patient outcomes, and if you save the system money, that your success is inevitable. And I think what we found is that that's just not necessarily the case. We had cases where payers would put us on 6-month repeating cycles of meetings, and every 6 months would schedule another meeting with us and ask us what was going on with a new team who knew nothing about the last meeting. And that's not startup timing. So, I certainly can say more about third-party payer reimbursement and how we think about it today as investors, but that was the leg of the stool that I think didn't necessarily hold up. And it's always the multi-hit hypothesis. And for us, it was the combination of SVB plus being caught in a deconstructive market, plus perils with reimbursement. And I think those were, a set of forces that were greater than as a small company we were able to endure.
Really interesting. And maybe taking a step back, you've been an investor, you have seen investments succeed and fail. You have taken a company public at $1 billion+ valuation. You've had to wind a company down. Given all of that experience, what advice would you give to a new entrepreneur trying to think through whether to take the risk of starting a company?
I hear a lot of people articulate that they want to become an entrepreneur and an operator so that they can later become an investor. And I think that's a path. I would happen to advocate for exactly the opposite path, which is I think the best entrepreneurial training is to become an investor first. And I think there are opportunities to learn what you like, what you don't like, what good looks like, what not good looks like when you're trafficking in thousands of opportunities a year as opposed to one. And it is incredibly easy to fall in love with your one idea. Whereas if you're on the buy side, seeing hundreds to thousands of ideas per unit time, I think gives you the context that it really takes to be successful as an entrepreneur. So yeah, all in, I'm a believer that people who are bullish on entrepreneurship should take that analyst or associate job at a fund and do it and love it and learn as much as you possibly can, and then make the educated decision as to whether you want to do something completely different or whether you want to stay an investor or whether you want to become an entrepreneur.
Well, Corey, as always, it has been a real pleasure. We really appreciate you taking the time and look forward to continuing the conversation soon.
Awesome, John. So good to see you. Thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Healthcare in Action, brought to you by THL. To help Healthcare in Action reach more listeners like you, either share this episode with a colleague, subscribe to the show, or rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. And for more background on THL's healthcare vertical, visit thl.com/verticals/healthcare.